During the quiet morning hours on Elm Street, firefighters responded to a house fire but uncovered something far worse than flames. Not one, but two young lives had been brutally taken, and their bodies were staged with swords. Today, we're going to talk about what really happened that night. How did a new friend who had been welcomed with open arms turn into their killer? And why did the crime scene look like something out of a real life horror film or nightmare? This is the case of Tanner Pehl and Sarah Clark, and I haven't seen anyone else talk about it. There are some really shocking developments throughout today's story, so if you want to hear about what really happened on Elm Street, which in my opinion is worse than the notorious film, stay tuned. Welcome to the True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you go. All right, my friends, let's get into it. Tanner Edmund Pehl was a 20-year-old man at the time of his death in 2008. He was born on January 19th, 1988 in Centralia, Washington, and he grew up in Colville in a loving family with 4 siblings. At 9 years old, Tanner moved to Spokane with his mother, Lori, where he attended Meade High School and graduated in 2006. Tanner was known for his academic ability and his artistic talents, and he was especially passionate about music. His family said that he was an incredible guitarist and even helped his father establish a DJ business. Friends and family remember Tanner for his goofy sense of humor and compassionate nature. He was a polite and kind soul, oftentimes going out of his way to let other people know how much he cared about them. He was known to leave little handwritten notes for all of his family and friends just to put a smile on their face or brighten their day. And Tanner also enjoyed cooking and worked as a chef at Brooklyn's Woodfire Grill in North Spokane. Those close to him say that he made friends everywhere that he went, which just points to his friendly, outgoing personality. By early 2008, Tanner was living with his mother and his brother in a house on East Elm Street in Spokane County. He shared the home with his family and a renter, and his mother and his brother went out of town on the night that the tragedy occurred, leaving Tanner home alone by himself. Sarah Ann Clark was 18 years old and a high school senior at the time of her murder. Born on December 29, 1989, Sarah was the 4th of 6 children in a close-knit family, and she was raised by her parents, Tisha and Steve, in Spokane. Sarah's family and friends describe her as an exuberant, loving young woman who had a gift for making people feel really good about themselves. She was outgoing and generous with her kindness and the type of person who made friends with anyone who was in need. In her free time, Sarah enjoyed playing the piano and doted on her animals, including her dog Lucy, hamster Scarlet, and even a pet duck named Harriet. She also loved spending time with her large family, shopping with friends, and watching her favorite TV show, Project Runway. At the time of her death, Sarah was just months away from graduating from Meade High School, where Tanner had graduated a couple years before. She balanced school with a part-time job at a local grocery store and had big dreams of becoming a hairstylist sometime after graduation. Hearing this actually reminded me of Tiffany James, who we covered last weekend. Those dreams were cut short, though. Sarah's warm personality and big heart would be talked about by her parents as a trait that led her to befriend Justin Krenshaw, who was a new arrival in town that would betray her in the most unfathomable way. At the time of the incident, Sarah was not dating Tanner, they were just good friends, and she had recently begun sort of a casual relationship with Justin Crenshaw. Justin William Crenshaw was 20 years old in 2008. He had grown up in Las Vegas, Nevada, and had experienced a lot of troubles growing up, including drug addiction and violent behavior. In Las Vegas, Justin had developed a serious drug addiction in his late teen years, and he went to rehab for it. He also had a criminal history of violence prior to coming to Spokane. As a young teen, Justin had been convicted of an assault after stabbing a friend in the neck during a fight, and for that, he was sentenced to 18 months in jail. Despite a friend describing Justin as the nicest and sweetest guy from childhood, his past behavior demonstrated a propensity for extreme violence if provoked. His background and his previous behavior wasn't known to the Pehl or Clark families at the time that they met him, though. In February 2008, Justin traveled from Nevada to Spokane, Washington, with the hope of starting a new life and reconnecting with family. He had recently reconnected through MySpace with his older half-sister living in Spokane named Nikki Van Vlime. She just so happened to be a close friend of Sarah Clark. Nikki and Justin had been out of contact for years, but Nikki invited Justin to come visit her. Justin's mother and grandmother, who stayed in Las Vegas, later said that he was so excited about reuniting with Nikki and getting away from all the bad influences that were there in Nevada. Justin moved in with his aunt Charlotte Kate Crenshaw, who was living in North Spokane at the time. Nikki, his sister, introduced Justin to her circle of friends, which included 18-year-old Sarah Clark. Sarah and Nikki were best friends, so naturally, if Nikki brought Justin out with her, that meant that Justin would be spending time with Sarah too. Justin also found a job soon after arriving as a kitchen worker at Brooklyn's Woodfire Grill, which is the same restaurant where Tanner Pehl was working as a chef. Justin and Tanner immediately hit it off at work and very quickly became best friends. With Tanner and Nikki being a part of the same social circle, Justin was quickly accepted as a new friend by both Tanner and by Sarah. In the 2 weeks leading up to the murders, Justin grew especially close to Sarah, and they began dating a little more serious than casually and spending quite a bit more time together. Nikki would later testify that she did have some concerns about this, though. In fact, just a few days before the murders, Nikki was upset to arrive home and find that Justin and Sarah had used her bedroom, if you know what I mean, and that made Nikki really uncomfortable. Despite the tension, nothing overtly alarming foreshadowed the violence to come, though. Aside from that, Justin seemed to be fitting in pretty well in Spokane. He was a recovering drug addict trying to stay sober and had no conflicts with Tanner or Sarah that anyone knew about. However, Justin did confide to some people that alcohol affected him strangely. He claimed that when he drank, he sometimes blacked out or became aggressive. Remember this for later. Now that you're familiar with kind of who everybody is, we're going to talk about a few things that happened that led up to today's story. On February 27th, 2008, Tanner and Justin both worked a shift at the restaurant. Sarah went to school that same day and later made plans to spend the night at a friend's house because Sarah had had an argument with her parents on the 27th. She planned to stay with Gabe Walters, who was a coworker of hers and Tanner's. Gabe Walters had an apartment of his own in Spokane where they would all sort of hang out and gather together, and he said that he was okay with Sarah crashing there whenever she needed to. That evening, after Tanner and Justin finished their work shifts, Tanner, Sarah, and Justin made plans to hang out. Their night started at Gabe Walters' apartment. Sarah drove her car to pick up Justin, and the two of them went over to Gabe's apartment where Gabe and his girlfriend, Kelsey Bartholomew, already were. They only spent part of that evening there, though. Gabe and Kelsey left their apartment for a little while to go run some errands, but they told Sarah and Justin that they could spend the night there if they wanted to. So, sometime around 11 p.m. on February 27th, neighbors reported seeing a white car at Tanner's house on 512 East Elm Street, which is Sarah's vehicle, either arriving or leaving around that time. This suggests that around 11, Tanner, Justin, and Sarah had decided to move the party over to Tanner's house. The house on Elm Street belonged to Lori Pehl, who is Tanner's mother, but Lori and Tanner's brother Matt, like I said earlier, were already away and out of the house, so Tanner had the home to himself that night. The group had the privacy of an empty house to drink and listen to music and relax, and drinking was a major part of that evening. Justin later claimed that he drank heavily and became extremely intoxicated that night. Sarah was also drinking along with Tanner and Justin. The partying aftermath and presence of liquor would later be confirmed by the evidence at the scene and witness statements. Bottles and cans were found, and at least one additional friend had been invited to join their party. Around 12:14 a.m. on February 28th, one of Tanner's coworkers, Kelsey Holubik, received a phone call from Justin Krenshaw. Kelsey was a hostess at the restaurant where both Tanner and Justin were working, and apparently Justin called her to invite her over to Tanner's house to party with them. Kelsey later testified about this call. She said that she could tell that they had all been drinking, but nothing sounded out of the ordinary during the phone call. On the phone, Kelsey quickly talked to Tanner and also heard a young woman in the background, being Sarah, encouraging her to come hang out with them. Kelsey wasn't able to go over that night. This phone call was significant, though, because it gives us sort of a snapshot in time. Just after midnight, all three, Tanner, Sarah, and Justin, were alive, awake, and functioning enough to invite other people over. Nothing seemed wrong or dangerous at that moment. What happened next and the precise sequence of events between roughly 12:30 to 3:30 in the morning on February 28th comes primarily from forensic evidence and later courtroom testimony because there were no surviving witnesses. Whatever the initial trigger was, evidence shows that at some point in those early morning hours, Justin Krenshaw launched a brutal attack inside the Pehl home. The quiet neighborhood would soon be the location of unimaginable violence. The gathering at 512 East Elm Street turned deadly. A witness in the neighborhood recalled hearing terrifying screams about 3:40 a.m. coming from the direction of the Pehl house. The neighbor didn't immediately call police at that time, but this evidence later corroborated some of the time frame that they guesstimated based on the crime. Inside the house, the crime that was unfolding was gruesome. Justin Crenshaw, armed with a knife from the Pehl kitchen, turned on his two friends. Inside Tanner's bedroom, Sarah Clark was attacked first. Justin stabbed Sarah repeatedly with a knife, inflicting a shocking number of wounds. The forensic and autopsy reports later indicated 26 separate stab wounds on Sarah's body alone. Many of these injuries were clustered around her head, neck, and upper torso, and we will get a little bit more into this later on, but Sarah sustained multiple deep cutting wounds on her neck. Her head was nearly severed from her body. Spokane County Chief Medical Examiner Dr. John Howard would later count at least 6 distinct incisions to Sarah's neck made in a side-to-side motion. Evidence suggests that Tanner may have been elsewhere in the house while Sarah was getting attacked. Hearing Sarah scream, Tanner probably rushed towards the bedroom to intervene, and this would have been a courageous but tragically fatal decision. Tanner was met by Justin's violence as well. A struggle between them began in the hallway. Tanner was taller and physically larger than Sarah, and he fought back hard, which is indicated by the multiple defensive wounds that were found on his arms and his hands during the autopsy. However, Justin was armed and in a frenzy. Tanner sustained numerous stab wounds as well. Many wounds were concentrated on Tanner's head and neck area, including at least one deep knife wound that penetrated through to his skull. He also had bruising and finger marks on his neck, suggesting that Justin at one point grabbed or strangled Tanner by the throat during the struggle. In a bizarre and horrifying move, he posed the bodies with large swords that were found in the home. Tanner's family later confirmed that there were decorative or collective swords that were found in the house, and Justin apparently took advantage of these weapons as props in the aftermath. Tanner Pehl's body was left in the hallway just outside of his bedroom. Justin covered Tanner's body with a blanket and then stabbed him with a large sword. Investigators later determined that the sword had pierced Tanner's abdomen up to 4 times, with one of those thrusts so powerful that it penetrated through his spine and into the floor beneath him. This was done after Tanner had already been killed, according to forensic evidence. The sword was left protruding from Tanner's blanketed body when the first responders arrived. Sarah Clark's body was found in Tanner's bedroom, partially propped up against the side of the bed near a nightstand. She was only partially dressed, wearing a t-shirt and boxer shorts, and was drenched in blood from the ferocious attack. Justin took a samurai-style sword, which I believe would be called a Japanese katana, and rested it against Sarah's neck. The sword was only placed there decoratively, though, leaning against her body as if he was staging the scene. Detectives later testified that they believe Justin staged Sarah's body in this way after death by posing her with a sword as a final insult or maybe to create a shocking image. The use of the sword seemed to have been symbolic or some sick attempt to confuse the crime scene because they were not the murder weapons. With both victims gone, Justin Krenshaw then turned his attention to covering up his crimes to escape. His plan was to destroy evidence and set the house on fire. In the kitchen of the home, Justin piled up flammable items like cardboard pizza boxes and some paper trash that he found in the kitchen. He put it on the stovetop and then he burned it on the burner. Spokane County Fire District 9 investigators later determined that the fire had been intentionally set on the stovetop and the boxes were the source of the fire. Before fleeing the scene, Justin also attempted to make it look like this had just been a robbery gone wrong. Police who processed the house stated that the picture frames and other items had been literally taken off of the walls and put face down. Drawers and cabinets had been ransacked and there were items thrown all over the house. This made it seem that someone might have broken in searching for valuables. However, this staging was not consistent because valuables were left in plain sight and the extreme overkill of the murders pointed away from a burglary gone wrong. Justin also made sure to take the real murder weapon with him when he left. At this moment, with the fire set and the scene staged as best as he could manage, Justin fled the Pehl home. He didn't stick around to see what would happen with the fire, though. In fact, the fire did not spread like he had hoped it would. Flames were mostly contained to the kitchen area, and some smoke did spread through the house, but not like Justin had planned. This partial burning attracted attention, but luckily not enough to destroy the victims' bodies or evidence. Justin stole Sarah's car, which was a white 2002 Honda Accord, which is also the same white car that neighbors had seen earlier that night. At approximately 4:30 in the morning on February 28, 2008, someone driving down East Elm Street noticed something alarming. Smoke and small flames were visible coming from the Pehl home, and he immediately dialed 911 to report the house fire. Spokane County Sheriff's Office, or the SCSO deputies, and Fire District 9 firefighters were dispatched within minutes to the address. The firefighters from Spokane County were the first to make entry into the home. They observed smoke coming from the house, particularly around the doors. Sheriff's deputies had arrived just moments before the fire crew, and deputies tried to kick in the front door, but they were forced backwards by the heavy smoke and heat, so they decided to just wait another minute or two for the firefighters to go inside with their proper gear. The fire crew rushed in to locate and extinguish the flames. They found that the fire was contained to the kitchen, and it didn't take long to put everything out and get everything under control. As firefighters pushed through the smoke to search for anyone inside the home, they stumbled upon a scene far more horrifying than a simple house fire. In the hallway, firefighters encountered what looked like a human on the floor draped with a smoldering blanket. Initially, they could only see a shape under the cloth, but one firefighter removed the partially burnt blanket and was met with a gruesome sight. This was a young man's body lying in a pool of blood with a large medieval-style sword protruding from his abdomen. This victim, of course, as we know, is Tanner Pehl. It was immediately evident to the firefighters that this was not a fire fatality, and the individual had to have been murdered before the fire. The firefighters entered a nearby bedroom, and there they found the second victim, a young woman. She was found slumped on the floor against the side of the bed with her legs extended on the floor and her upper body propped up by the side of the bed and nightstand. She was also drenched in blood. The samurai sword was still positioned against her neck. This victim was later identified as Sarah Clark. One firefighter later testified that at first glance, it looked as though the sword had been used on her neck by the way that it was positioned, because she had a massive open wound, but we know that that's not what happened. They realized that both were beyond any help at this point and clearly deceased on scene. The firefighters immediately treated the site as a possible crime scene and notified law enforcement about what had been discovered. The combination of stab wounds and the fire made it really obvious that something criminal happened here. The fire captain reported to the sheriff's deputies that they had 2 dead bodies inside with clearly traumatic injuries. With the fire out and no other victims or survivors found, the focus then shifted entirely to investigation. By sunrise, the house on Elm Street was swarming with law enforcement. The Spokane County Sheriff's Office secured the scene and called in their Major Crimes Detectives Unit along with their CSI unit. The quiet neighborhood was infiltrated with police cars, fire trucks, and tons of yellow crime scene tape. Sheriff's investigators conducted an initial walkthrough once the smoke had cleared. They were horrified at the sight of the staging and the obvious bloodshed throughout the hallway and the bedroom. They also observed the evidence of ransacking and that many of the picture frames had been turned down, like I'd mentioned earlier. Detectives also quickly found key pieces of physical evidence. Near the back door of the kitchen, in the kitchen area where the fire was started, they noticed a bloody fingerprint on the interior side of the doorknob and the door itself. They carefully documented and swabbed this fingerprint for analysis, but aside from the obvious swords, investigators also collected a variety of potential evidence, including a blood-stained kitchen knife that was recovered lying on top of the refrigerator in the kitchen. This knife was different from the decorative swords because it appeared to be an ordinary kitchen knife and had suspected blood on it. Detectives noticed signs that the killer may have attempted to clean up or at least move through the house with bloody hands. A can of Easy Off oven cleaner was found with blood on it, and there were also bloody swipe marks on the walls in Tanner's bedroom. This meant that the perpetrator may have grabbed random items or surfaces while committing these crimes. Another telling find was Tanner Pehl's wallet, which was found on his bed, and it also had blood on it. DNA analysis would show a mixture of blood being Tanner's, Sarah's, and a third unknown person at the time. The authorities began the process of identifying the victims so that they could notify the families. The male victim was quickly identified as Tanner E. Pehl, since this was his residence on the driver's license and it matched the house records in his wallet on the bed. Tanner's mother, Lori, and family were notified of his tragic death later that day. The female victim was identified as Sarah A. Clark, and because she didn't live at that address, her identity had to be confirmed by using her ID that was found in her purse. By midday on February 28th, both families had been informed of the devastating news. Autopsies on both Tanner and Sarah were performed quickly after the discovery of their bodies by the Spokane County Medical Examiner's Office. The chief medical examiner, Dr. John Howard, conducted thorough exams that would later provide critical evidence in court. The autopsy results confirmed what the crime scene had already suggested, documenting the full extent of injuries and causes of death for each of the victims. Dr. Howard found that both Tanner and Sarah were killed before the fire was set because neither of their lungs had showed any traces of smoke inhalation injuries. This meant that they were not breathing during the fire, reinforcing that the fire was lit post-mortem and it was an attempt to destroy evidence rather than an original cause of death. Tanner suffered over a dozen stab and slash wounds to his head, neck, and torso. One particularly deep wound penetrated his skull. He also had gaping wounds in his neck area and defensive wounds, including cuts across his palms, fingers, and forearms. We touched on this briefly a little while ago, but there were also those finger-shaped bruises on his neck. These bruises matched the pattern of someone's hand tightly gripping his throat, meaning that Justin had choked Tanner at some point. This didn't cause Tanner's death, but they did paint a picture of how physical and violent the struggle was. The sword was found impaled through Tanner's body, and it was also carefully examined. Dr. Howard confirmed the investigator's suspicion that the sword did in fact penetrate all the way through to the ground. He did this after he was already gone. This was proved by the lack of any hemorrhaging in the area that was pierced. In a person that's heart is still alive and beating, a sword thrust through the abdomen would cause massive internal bleeding, but in Tanner's case, circulation had already stopped, meaning that the heart had stopped. So the sword caused mechanical damage only, including fracturing his spine without any internal bleeding. Sarah sustained roughly 26 stab wounds. These were concentrated to her head, neck, and upper torso area. The most devastating injuries were a series of deep incised wounds to her neck. Dr. Howard documented at least 6 distinct cuts in the neck area inflicted in that side-to-side movement. She also had a stab wound to her skull, similar to Tanner's, that had pierced all the way through into her brain. Additionally, her chest and abdomen had a number of stab injuries, indicating that the assailant stabbed her repeatedly in a frenzy even after she was gone. Despite being caught by surprise, Sarah did have defensive wounds as well. She had cuts on her hands and forearms that showed that she tried to grab the knife or shield herself. This detail is heartbreaking because it means that they were both aware of what was happening and tried their best to defend themselves against this monster. The ME confirmed that the samurai sword was only placed against Sarah's neck and did not cause any additional injury beyond what the knife had done. It was just set there. The autopsy only mentioned superficial pressure marks from the sword, so the ME determined that the sword was not used at all during the attack. So, like Tanner, Sarah's body was just staged after death. Both families would later learn about these painful details, and I cannot imagine hearing this about someone that I love. The brutality that was documented by Dr. Howard left no doubt that this was a vicious murder. Now investigators needed to piece together all the information and figure out who committed this heinous double murder and arson. From the moment that the crime scene was processed on February 28th, Spokane County Sheriff's detectives began working around the clock to identify the perpetrator of this brutal double homicide. Given the violent nature of the crime, detectives knew that the killer likely had injuries, including cuts and/or burns, so detectives were hopeful that the perpetrator left some DNA evidence behind. Now remember, detectives found a bloody fingerprint on the back door and a bloody knife and the unusual swords, and this was all sent off for testing. Detectives then gathered a list of people to interview and talk to, including the Clark and Pehl families. They wondered if this could have been a love triangle gone wrong, but Tanner's close friends clarified that Tanner was single and Sarah was just a friend. Sarah's boyfriend, on the other hand, seemed to be Justin Krenshaw, so it didn't take long for suspicion to turn towards Justin as a key person to locate and interview. Another person investigators contacted immediately was Gabe Walters. Gabe's apartment was where Sarah and Justin had been the night before, in case you forgot. Gabe and his girlfriend Kelsey Bartholomew told police that they left Sarah and Justin at the apartment at some point, and when they returned, Sarah and Justin were not there. Gabe also mentioned that Justin had not actually slept there as he had planned to. Remember this for later. As they canvassed the area and spoke to neighbors, detectives learned about a vehicle that was seen leaving the Pehl home that morning, and the Clarks reported Sarah's car missing when they realized that it wasn't at the scene. This led officers to search for Sarah's white 2002 Honda. They found it on the night of February 28th, abandoned near a park not far from Justin's aunt's house, and the car was impounded for forensic exams. Inside Sarah's car, the steering wheel and gear shift had blood on them. The blood on the gear shift knob was found to match Justin Crenshaw's DNA and did not match Tanner and Sarah's DNA. This was a critical piece of evidence because it placed Justin in Sarah's car, bleeding after the murders. Justin's fingerprints were also found on the outside of the driver's door, further confirming that at a minimum he had at least driven it. Detectives then interviewed Tanner and Sarah's friends. Kelsey Holubik had told them about that midnight phone call from Justin inviting her over, which placed Justin at Tanner's house on Elm Street with the victims after midnight. Gabe Walters confirmed Justin was with Sarah and left his apartment. Nikki, Justin's sister, was also talked to. In fact, Nikki and Kate, the aunt, played a significant role that day. They already had their suspicions about Justin's potential involvement even before any kind of forensic confirmation. That morning on February 28th, when detectives went looking for Justin, they found him at Kate Crenshaw's North Spokane home where he had been staying. Justin's aunt later said that Justin had said something very odd to her before the police had arrived that morning. He told her that the police were going to want his clothes. This immediately raised Kate's suspicion. Why would Justin assume that the police might be interested in his clothing unless he knew something incriminating had something to do with what he was wearing? Let me know in the comments down below what your reaction to hearing something like that would have been. I think I would have been shocked. Detectives did not storm in and arrest Justin immediately. At that point, he was just a person of interest who had been with the victims, but they needed more evidence to arrest and detain him. Two interesting things happened. First, Justin himself actually called the sheriff's office on the afternoon of February 28th to volunteer information. He had learned that Tanner and Sarah were dead, possibly through Nikki or social media, and he wanted to get a hold of the story. He had learned that Tanner and Sarah were dead, possibly through Nikki or the media, and he wanted to get ahead of the story. Justin told deputies on the phone that he had been at Tanner's house on the previous night but left at some point. He was basically trying to establish a claim of innocence or explain maybe why his evidence might be there. Second, detectives were already en route to interview Justin and arrived at his Aunt Kate's house not long after this call. Justin, expecting them since he had called them, was waiting outside and cooperated initially by inviting them in to talk. During this first in-person interview, Justin spun a very detailed alibi. He admitted that he was with Tanner and Sarah that night, saying yes, they all drank together at Tanner's house. But Justin claimed that he got very drunk to the point of blacking out and asked to be driven back to Gabe Walters' apartment because he said that he wasn't feeling well and had had enough for the night. Justin told detectives that Tanner and Sarah did him a favor and drove him to Gabe's place in Sarah's car, dropping him off there at some point that morning, and then the two of them, Tanner and Sarah, supposedly went back to Tanner's house without him. Justin said that he slept over at Gabe Walters' apartment alone and then walked back to his aunt's house the next morning. The detectives listening to this story heard multiple inconsistencies and suspicious points, and I'm sure that you've already caught on to them as well. Justin didn't have his own vehicle, so someone usually would have to drive him around places. If he truly stayed at Gabe Walters' apartment, they would have seen him there that morning, which Gabe did not. In fact, Gabe's apartment did show signs that Justin had been there, but only briefly, and you're going to be shocked when you hear what they found. Justin's claim of walking home in the morning was also questionable. It's several miles between Gabe's place to Kate's house, so it is possible, but why not call Nikki or someone else in the family for a ride? Also, if he walked, where was Sarah's car? Justin appeared uninjured except for one cut on his finger. Detectives saw a fresh cut on one of Justin's fingers while talking to him, and when asked casually about it, Justin had an explanation ready. He said that he cut himself on a handicap parking sign near Gabe Walters' apartment. This story sounded strange. They later checked Gabe's apartment area and found no broken sign or any evidence to support how his finger had been cut. Investigators also asked Justin about what he wore that night. Detectives asked if he had had a pair of black Nike sneakers, and Justin denied owning any black Nikes. This was obviously not true because Nikki and Kate had both already informed detectives that Justin did in fact own a pair of black Nike shoes. When pressed about this lie, Justin changed his story and admitted that he did own a pair, but claimed that he had thrown away those shoes a few days prior because they had been damaged from dirt and oil. Convenient, right? He said that the garbage had already been collected, so he couldn't dig them out of the trash either. The detectives also noticed Justin's demeanor. Justin was unusually calm for someone who had just had two friends be brutally murdered. Him not even being upset came off as a significant red flag. The investigators then obtained a search warrant to collect Justin's fingerprints, palm prints, and DNA, so they transported him down to the Spokane Public Safety Building. At the station, forensic specialists took Justin's fingerprints and palm prints and immediately compared them to the bloody fingerprint and palm print found on that back door of the Pehl home. It did not take long at all for a match. The bloody fingerprint on the inside of that back door was identified as Justin Krenshaw's palm print. This was the smoking gun linking him to the scene at the time of the murders. Meanwhile, other evidence was continuing to come together rapidly on both February 28th and the 29th. While they were at the station, other investigators were processing Gabe Walters' apartment, and they found no evidence to support that Justin had spent the night there. However, they did find a pair of men's underwear with blood on the waistband left behind. The brand and style of underwear matched what Justin was wearing when he was taken into custody. The blood on that underwear came back as a mixture of Sarah's and Tanner's DNA. They also found Justin's fingerprints in Gabe's bathroom in the shower, meaning that he likely rinsed himself off quickly before he left. Forensic techs examined the knife found on top of the refrigerator at the crime scene too. This knife turned out to be a blood-stained kitchen knife from the Pehl home, and testing showed that it had a combination of DNA from Justin and smaller traces from both Tanner and Sarah. Justin's blood was on the blade and handle, which is consistent with cutting his finger, and some blood from the victims as well. The presence of Justin's DNA and blood on that knife at the scene directly tied him to the stabbing. Bloody fingerprints and smears belonging to Justin were found on the wall of Tanner's bedroom and on that can of cleaner. Each of these were later matched to Justin's DNA and prints. There was also a bloodied belt left in that house that had an eerie design on it. It had symbols of a broken heart, a knife, and the words that say, "Trust no one." This belt belonged to Justin. All of this evidence was pointing directly at Justin Krenshaw. The next morning, SCSO formally arrested Justin Krenshaw for the murders of Tanner Pehl and Sarah Clark. He was booked into the Spokane County Jail at about 2:30 in the morning on February 29th, charged initially with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The sheriff's department announced to the media that a 20-year-old Las Vegas man had been arrested in connection with the double homicide and that he was an acquaintance of the victims. From that point forward, Justin was behind bars with a $1 million bond. He denied his guilt, sticking to his story that he left earlier and someone else had to have done it. But investigators were confident that they had the right man. In the days and weeks following Justin Krenshaw's arrest, investigators continued to build their case against him by gathering every piece of available evidence. On February 29th, the day after the murders, employees at a local business called Roundy's Kawasaki, which is located along a roadway in North Spokane, made a startling discovery. They spotted a knife lying in the median of the road outside of the building with what appeared to be blood on it. They immediately contacted law enforcement. Detectives realized that this location could be a possible route between the crime scene and Justin's aunt's house or maybe Gabe's apartment, and the timing made too much sense. SCSO deputies responded and collected the knife as evidence, and it was described as a kitchen knife by the brand Tools of the Trade. The Pehl family kitchen had the same brand of knives, hinting that this knife, in addition to the one found on the fridge, came from Tanner's own kitchen set, and this one was probably thrown out of the car window as he was escaping. Forensic testing on this recovered knife confirmed that it had blood on the blade, matching Sarah Clark's DNA mixed with DNA from Justin Krenshaw, so this one was the murder weapon that was likely used on Sarah. Finding it where investigators did also helped them to map out Justin's movements shortly before fleeing and abandoning the car. Despite Justin's earlier attempts to hide his clothes and lying about throwing away his shoes days prior, his clothing did eventually surface. Nearly 2 months after the murders, on April 25, 2008, Justin's aunt Kate Crenshaw was cleaning out her garage for a neighborhood yard sale. In a plastic storage bin in the garage, she found a Kmart shopping bag stuffed with clothes and shoes caked in dried blood. Kate immediately recognized the items and knew that they belonged to Justin. She called 911 to report what she found. Sheriff's detectives responded, and inside of that bag, they found a pair of black Nikes. They were stained with what appeared to be blood, and DNA testing showed that these shoes matched Tanner Pehl's DNA. In that bag, there was also a pair of blue jeans that were soaked in blood. Testing revealed that the blood on Justin's jeans was a mixture of Sarah's and Tanner's DNA. Last but not least, The plastic garbage bag itself that was holding everything inside of that bin had Justin's fingerprints on them, showing that he himself put everything in that bag. Justin had hidden the bloody clothing in his aunt's garage, likely planning to get rid of it all later, but then he got arrested before he had a chance to do so. They sat there until Kate found them weeks later. With the bloody clothing found, any lingering doubt, if there were any, of Justin's involvement was long gone. Sergeant Dave Reagan thanked Kate for alerting the authorities, saying that she did the right thing and said how important this piece was for the investigation. By the time the forensic testing was complete, the DNA evidence against Justin was overwhelming. It all painted a picture of exactly what happened that night. As if the physical evidence wasn't enough, the witness accounts and Justin's own behavior spoke volumes too. One neighbor heard screams at 3:40 in the morning, which helped them also to develop a timeline. Another neighbor mentioned seeing a white car at 11 p.m., placing Sarah's vehicle there much earlier than what Justin had said. Nikki, Justin's own sister, told detectives that on the 28th, she feared Justin might be involved even before any evidence showed that. By late spring of 2008, the Spokane County Prosecutor's Office formally charged Justin W. Krenshaw with 2 counts of first-degree murder, and given the heinous circumstances, they filed aggravating factors to potentially seek the death penalty. The aggravators stated that this was an especially heinous, cruel, and depraved crime. Under Washington law, first-degree murder with these aggravating factors can be punishable by life without parole or the death penalty. Spokane County prosecutors opted not to seek the death penalty in this case, possibly for a multitude of reasons, but now the goal was to ensure that he would at least receive life imprisonment with no chance of ever seeing the light of day again. Let me know how you guys feel about this in the comments. I know that the death penalty is a very polarizing topic, so I'm curious to see what your thoughts are given the nature of this specific crime. As the case moved towards trial, detectives and prosecutors had assembled one of the most solid murder cases that Spokane has ever seen. There was forensic evidence, timelines, the defendant's changing stories, and even his violent track record from Nevada. The double homicide on Elm Street had little mystery left because the evidence clearly identified Justin Krenshaw as the sole perpetrator of this horrifying crime. It took 2 years before the case finally went to trial. Justin Krenshaw was initially represented by a public defender, but concerns were raised about a potential conflict of interest when he actually discovered that an investigator in the public defender's office was close to Sarah Clark's family. In July of 2008, Judge Tari Eitzen granted his request for new counsel to avoid any issues, and she appointed a private attorney named Chris Bugbee to handle the case. Bugbee, who is a well-known Spokane defense lawyer, was also running for county prosecutor at that time, and he took over towards the end of 2008 to begin reviewing all the forensic evidence and witness evidence. Bugbee indicated that he planned to pursue a diminished capacity defense based on pathological intoxication. From what I read, this is a very rare claim to make, and it suggests that Justin's extreme reaction to alcohol made him incapable of forming intent. Basically, he's saying that the alcohol was to blame and made decisions for him. To support this theory, the defense consulted forensic psychiatrist Dr. Jerry Larson, who recommended neuropsychological testing, including a highly controversial experiment to have Justin consume alcohol under controlled observation so that they could assess and see what he does. This plan led to multiple trial delays because the defense had a difficult time arranging this testing. However, by early 2010, no facility would agree to conduct this kind of experiment, and Judge Eitzen grew impatient with all the delays. She ruled that the case needed to proceed and warned that if Justin refused to cooperate with the state's own psychological evaluation, the defense could lose the right altogether to argue diminished capacity. Ultimately, both sides presented mental health evidence, but no scientific proof of pathological intoxication existed, only that Justin was extremely drunk with an estimated blood alcohol level of about 0.30, which is roughly 4 times the legal limit. The double murder trial for Justin Krenshaw began on July 12, 2010, more than 2 years after the brutal killings of Tanner Pehl and Sarah Clark. Prosecutors Jack Driscoll and Larry Haskell led the case for the state, and the defense attorney Chris Bugbee represented Justin. He faced 2 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, and the prosecution presented extensive forensic, witness, and circumstantial evidence showing that he deliberately murdered the victims and attempted to destroy all of the evidence by setting the house on fire. Here were some of their points. Fire and crime scene experts described how the fire was intentionally set using the pizza boxes on the stove and how the victims' bodies were discovered with severe stab wounds and postmortem sword placements. Forensic analysts presented Crenshaw's fingerprints and DNA mixed with the victims on multiple items: the 2 knives, Tanner's wallet, and Crenshaw's own clothing and shoes. The medical examiner, Dr. John Howard, shared the autopsy findings, including the extreme overkill, near decapitation, and absence of soot in the lungs, proving that they were both killed before the fire. Graphic photos were shown in court, and these deeply impacted the jurors. I don't know that you could ever really rid your mind of images like that. Detective Mike Drapo presented the 2 swords used and confirmed that they came from the victim's own home, emphasizing that Krenshaw armed himself with whatever he could find in the house. Witnesses gave their testimonies about the timelines, and family members, including Crenshaw's own sister and aunt, describing finding bloody clothes, and shared Justin's suspicious comments afterwards. The evidence of a prior assault in Nevada, where Justin had stabbed a friend, was shared in court to show a pattern of violent behavior. In his closing, Prosecutor Driscoll told jurors that the crime scene showed Krenshaw had no sign of a conscience. The defense shockingly agreed that Justin Krenshaw did kill Sarah and Tanner, but argued that he lacked any intent due to a rare condition called pathological intoxication. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Jerry Larson testified that Krenshaw may suffer from an idiosyncratic reaction to alcohol, meaning an abnormal reaction, which can cause violent behavior and memory loss even after small amounts of drinking. A childhood friend corroborated this, claiming that Justin had previously acted violent and forgotten everything after drinking. Justin did not testify, and the defense urged jurors to convict him of a lesser charge like manslaughter as opposed to first-degree murder. Remember, though, they weren't able to do the experiment necessary to prove this. The prosecution claimed that Justin Crenshaw's deliberate actions, like retrieving weapons, staging the scene, setting the fire, and lying afterwards, all showed a clear awareness and intent, not unconscious intoxication. On July 27, 2010, after just 4 hours of deliberating, the jury found Justin Krenshaw guilty on both counts of aggravated first-degree murder. They unanimously determined that he acted with deliberate cruelty and murdered multiple victims. Because prosecutors had not sought the death penalty in this case, the mandatory sentence in today's story was life in prison without parole. Justin showed little emotion as the verdict was read, while family members of Tanner and Sarah were crying and hugging each other. Reliving this horror in a courtroom was finally over. Reports described Crenshaw's behavior during this trial as mocking and remorseful. At one point, he allegedly winked and made faces at the victims' families until he was ordered to stop. This behavior, in my opinion, goes directly against what the defense was claiming. Would he be acting so cold-hearted if he were truly just intoxicated and committed these crimes without recalling anything because of the alcohol? Let me know if you feel the same way. The victims' relatives described the verdict as justice served. Even Justin's attorney acknowledged the outcome was inevitable. 2 weeks after his guilty verdict, Justin Krenshaw appeared for sentencing. The courtroom was filled with grieving families and supporters of the victims. A total of 86 victim impact statements were submitted. They were loved by so many people, and family members described the deep pain and lasting loss caused by these murders. Sarah's mother, Tisha Clark, said, quote, "The murders gave us a life sentence, and he deserves no less," end quote. Tanner's mother, Lori Pehl, expressed sympathy for Justin's family, but relief that he could never harm anyone again. She is so strong for saying that, because I personally don't know if I could if I were in her position. Judge Terry Eitzen sentenced Justin to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole, stressing that each life stolen deeply mattered. At 22 years old, Justin was transferred to the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, which is a maximum security facility. To nobody's surprise, Justin appealed his conviction, saying that he had ineffective counsel and that the court wrongly denied further testing for his pathological intoxication defense. In October 2013, the Washington Court of Appeals rejected all claims, ruling that his lawyer's performance was appropriate and that additional testing would not have changed the outcome. His life sentences were upheld, and by 2014, all of his appeals had been exhausted. In February 2014, while incarcerated at Walla Walla, Justin violently attacked another inmate named Justin Hoyt with a homemade shank in the prison's D unit. He attempted to stab Hoyt's throat while the victim was on the phone with his fiancée. Hoyt survived this attack but suffered 6 stab wounds, facial fractures, and a broken nose. Prison officials placed Justin in solitary confinement and filed new charges. He chose the same method of attack in the same body region without any alcohol influence. Interesting. This assault reinforced his violent tendencies and shut down any belief that alcohol alone had ever caused any of his earlier crimes. He was charged with attempted murder. Following the stabbing, Washington authorities transferred Crenshaw to a different state correctional system for security reasons. By 2023, so very recently, reports confirmed that he is serving time in Virginia's Department of Corrections under an inmate exchange program for being a high-risk offender. Despite his imprisonment, the victims' families describe living a lifelong sentence of grief. Both families have created memorials and advocacy efforts to make sure that their memory and impact continue to live on. Sarah Clark's memory was honored with a painted zebra stripe bench at Meade High School, and Tanner Pehl's family got his guitar back, which had been held in evidence for quite some time, and this really helped provide the family with a cherished piece of Tanner's legacy. For the families of Tanner and Sarah, this has been indescribably painful. They lost 2 vibrant young people who had promising futures, and this crime took place on the eerie Elm Street. Tanner was the musician and chef with a heart of gold, and Sarah was the vivacious teen who dreamed of making other people feel beautiful. Their memories live on in the hearts of their loved ones and in their community tributes that were made for them. Every holiday and every birthday, their families are reminded of the void that has been left behind by this senseless crime. But they are so strong and so resilient. They get together and support each other, speaking out for victims' rights, and they ensure that Tanner and Sarah will never be forgotten. As always, I'm sending Tanner and Sarah and their family all of my love, and I hope and pray that they're resting peacefully. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I know today's story was a little bit different from what we've been covering in our Halloween series, so let me know what you think. It didn't take place on actual Halloween, but Elm Street is a well-known film that many people watch during spooky season, and this story needed to be told because I actually haven't really seen anyone cover it. So please be sure to take extra good care of yourselves this week. Nurse's orders. I'll see you next weekend for our final Halloween episode. Bye.